Okay, welcome to Car Camp Seattle, my channel. Today I'm trying out a new microphone. And let me just tell you something. I just spent about 10 minutes recording a whole video and I realized I didn't even have this microphone turned on. So I feel pretty stupid. Did the whole video for nothing. I'm also sitting kind of in a weird area, so the sun is like shining right like on my neck sort of. Anyways, you're probably wondering, why am I telling you all this? Well, so I have had my channel for about a year, and during the time I've had my channel, I've bought several things to help with my channel. I mean, I bought a brand new camera. I've bought a selfie stick for my camera, and today now I'm testing out my microphone. Now, I did do a live stream about a week ago just to make sure my microphone was working. It was working just fine. So then I went ahead and deleted that live stream because really there was no point to that live stream other than to just make sure the microphone was working. Today, I happen to be filming in an area that is extremely noisy, and I thought this would be a great way to test out the microphone, see if it's even picking up my sound very well, or if all you're hearing is like the buses and the cars and all the noise that's going on in the background. So, like I said, why am I telling you all this? It's because anyone who's interested in starting a YouTube channel on their own, this is all stuff that you might want to consider. So I hope to motivate you any way I can. But today, I think some of the other stuff I might talk about, well, let's see. Lately, can you hear that airplane? Just curious. Okay, so lately, I started watching these videos about people who, I guess, really don't like their jobs very much, or the video title will be something to the effect of, "This is why I quit my job." And I find these videos very interesting. I think the reason these videos were suggested to me is because I did a few videos on my own where I complained about some bad jobs I've had in the past. I'm sure we've all had a bad job here or there. Sometimes things happen and it makes you want to tell someone to take this job and shove it. So that was kind of the gist of the videos I made. So I think because I started watching these videos, you know how YouTube will just start suggesting more videos to you, kind of the same topic. And so, kind of, as they say, fell down the YouTube rabbit hole of where I'm just watching all these videos of people who can't stand their jobs and all the reasons they quit their jobs and all these toxic workplaces and that sort of thing. And, I think my main takeaway is sometimes when you're at a bad job, there's two reasons why, you might quit, because for your own well being and state of mind, you just don't want to work there anymore. But also, people stay in these jobs because they need the money, they need to pay their bills. And therefore, if they were to quit, that would put them into an even worse state of mind, because then they would not be able to pay any of their bills. They wouldn't be able to eat. They wouldn't be able to survive. So then they stick it out at a job they can't stand. I would, of course, always advise someone to not stay at a job they can't stand. But you can't neglect the fact that people still have bills to pay. People still need to hopefully have a roof over their head or food to eat, especially if you have a family, children, people that rely on you to be there. So it's one of those things that people kind of get stuck in a bad situation. So this is where I want to talk about. I've had my ups and downs with jobs, good jobs, bad jobs. I've had some really good jobs actually, where, like, if I wasn't well paid, I still enjoyed the job. So the job was still fun and the people I work with were great. But sometimes, like you said, you got bills to pay. So you got to quit that job and find another one that pays more. But, then I've had some really awful jobs, and, it sucks trying to like stick around at a job you can't stand, that you'd rather just like call in sick than show up. You just can't take one more day of that job. I definitely understand what that's like. So anyways, I just wanted to talk about my situation, how I ended up coming to be where I'm at now. I came because of a job. I was offered a job, and for those of you who know a little bit about my backstory, about how I moved here to where I live now for a job. But the thing is, just because you have a job offer in a new city doesn't mean you have a place to live. And so therefore I was pretty much just living out of my car. Now, at the time, my thought process was, I think I'll just get a second job, because usually people who work all day, at the end of the day, you have a home to go to. You go home, you kick back, and you relax. But I didn't have a home to go to, so at the end of the day I thought maybe if I had a second job, I'd at least have somewhere to go. And so then I ended up working two jobs. So, yes, I moved to Washington State for a job, ended up getting a second job, like a night job, and was, I should at least point out before I even got that second job that, sometimes just looking for a job is a job. And I was spending so much of my spare time going online and applying to jobs and going to job interviews and traveling all over. So from the time I had a job, I was doing the job search. Then I had a second job. I was working two jobs. I never had a day off. Like, I was working 7 days a week. So basically, it should be no surprise to anyone that I eventually had some extreme burnout. I was worn out, and not only just worn out, like tired, like, most people, they want to take a vacation. But what I mean is, I actually, I started to get sick, like, come down with like colds and flu symptoms and that sort of thing. Maybe that is all, what's it called, psychosomatic or whatever, when you mentally, like, can't keep up with things. So then physically your body starts to, like, deteriorate. Anyways, I just came to a conclusion after working two jobs 7 days a week for a year that I thought my next step would be, of course, to maybe just find one job that actually pays enough that I wouldn't have to keep living in my car, that I could actually find a nice place to live. And so then, once again, I was on the job search because now I'm working two jobs. But then, any of my spare time that I had, which was not much, then I had to start applying to jobs again. I had to go online, search for jobs, go on job interviews, do that whole thing. I did eventually find a job, meaning I was able to quit the job I had moved here for and quit the second spare time job to focus on this brand new job. And I have to say, this is where things kind of went downhill for me. It was here for a year, and you could say things were kind of like fast paced in that year because I was so busy and I was working so much. But once I had decided to just take this third job, which would be now my full time, high paying job, supposedly, I found that job, very quickly I learned that certain things that were promised to me, like how much pay I'd be making, what the benefits were, I was very much strung along. A lot of things were promised but never followed through on. The job involved actually a lot of travel to other states, so flying on airplanes, and there'd be trips that we'd be required to take, and then the company wouldn't pay for my travel or hotel stays. I mean, that's a problem, right? All of that should be included in your benefits. But anyways, I feel like that's where I could definitely start going down a long laundry list of complaints about that job. How there seemed to be a lot of favoritism in that job, where certain people were treated different than other people, even if we all had the same work experience or same education or even higher education or more work experience. Somehow we were kind of considered down lower on the totem pole because we weren't, shall we say, sleeping with the boss. Well, let me say, because this is Seattle, Washington, the tech industry, the job was in the gaming field. And so I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of news stories about some things that have gone on with tech gaming companies and certain people getting treated a certain way. So I'm not sure how many people would be interested in hearing that story, but I got a lot to say about that. All right, so now I am filming without the microphone, so you can tell the sound difference. Like I said, I'm just kind of testing this out, see how this works. So let's get back to the task at hand. So what are we supposed to do? We hate our job. Now what? Okay, right? So the number one advice you probably hear is you should always update your resume. Well, applying for jobs has kind of changed in the last 20 years or so. Instead of just making a resume, there's more to it than that. In fact, some jobs you might have to scan a QR code or upload a video to some website just to apply for a job. Sounds complicated. So I'm not going to give all my opinions on how I feel about the whole applying for job situation and how it's changed. But let's just say that as long as you have updated, kept a record of what your work experience is, your education history, and you having a good idea of all of that information so that when you do have to go online to apply for a job or do a video or a Zoom call to apply for a job, that you have all that information. But what I will suggest, do a YouTube search for what's the best way to update your resume, and you're probably going to find a lot of videos that are very helpful on that topic. Okay, so now what? You still hate your job. Okay, so this next part I hope will be something to give you a little bit of hope. It's where basically I'm just gonna say, do a job search. You're not looking for work right now, but you can still look and see what's out there. And nowadays, certain states, certain locales have laws in place where a job listing has to list how much the job pays. So there's no, mystery of what does this job pay? Now I got to negotiate a good salary. So keep that in mind. But the reason why I'm saying to just go look for what jobs are available is that might just kind of like pique your interest of seeing what's out there. Maybe you're not looking for a job. Maybe you're not ready to make that change. But once you got it in your head, you get an idea of what's out there, what the pay rate is like. It's probably a lot more than you're getting paid right now. So, check that out. You might even start looking at jobs in other cities. Maybe you have no intention of moving, but it gives you an idea of, if I lived in this other city, the pay there is a little bit higher. But if, say, there's a place you wanted to move because you have family members and you're like, that city doesn't really have a very good pay, so maybe I don't want to move there to be close to family. So those are all things that you might want to just kind of, like I say, scope out. You're not making any major life decisions. You're just checking out what's out there. You're just browsing, seeing what's out there. But another thing, I bring this up because I was with a company for about 5 years. And, so in that company, I worked there, basically, you could say I really knew my job well. I knew all the software inside and out. Everything about that job, I would have been considered a top employee. But when it comes to looking for another job, people would look at my work experience and think, you worked for this company that uses this really outdated software. Do you have any experience in this newer software? And it's like, no, I don't, because I was wasting away all these years at some company using some old outdated software that hasn't moved with the times like all the other companies have. So what you start to realize is when you look at job, help wanted ads, that sort of thing, they will tell you what sort of software they're looking for someone to be proficient in. And you might realize, like, I've never even heard of that software. I don't know anything about that. Now, you may be the expert. You have 5 years experience in this one software. And it turns out nobody's using that software anymore. You start looking at these help wanted ads and you see people really want you to be using this other software. This is going to give you an idea of, before you start applying for jobs. Sure, you can be trained. Easy, right? But maybe a job isn't willing to train someone. They want someone who has experience. Well, this is where you got to look at those help wanted ads, look and see what's out there. And then maybe what you'll have to do is get the training, meaning maybe you could take a class, maybe you could do some online tutorials. But once you've got that in your mind that, hey, I really want to quit the job I'm at, but I don't have the skills to take a new job. So you got to look into that. And then that way you can do your training, try to figure it out, see what kind of education you might need. We're not talking about like going to college and getting a degree. I'm talking about maybe just learning about a certain software program that's out there. Go online, look it up, watch YouTube, train on how to use it. I say train, but I mean like just watch some videos, learn about it. If you have access to that software, you can download it to your computer. You can practice using it like, as if you were in the workplace. These are all things to keep in mind if you're looking to start a new job somewhere else and you're really concerned about that you don't have that work experience or the knowledge you need to get that new job. Okay, the last idea that I'm going to put out there is, if you happen to have a full-time job and you really want to quit the job, you might consider going to part-time. And of course you're thinking, but I can't financially afford to go to part-time. But if you were to cut your hours, and you're planning on quitting anyways, right? That means that the rest of the time that you have available to yourself, you can start applying for other jobs. And then even if you get a second part-time job and now you're working 2 jobs, sometimes just that whole idea, concept, feeling of, well, if I quit this one job, it's all right, I already have another job. Or if they fire me from this job, I'm not gonna worry about it because I already got this other job, right? And there's just kind of like this peace of mind, this mindset of you're not stressing that you just have one job. All your eggs are in one basket. Because now it doesn't matter anymore. Now you got 2 jobs. And now if one job doesn't work out, that's no problem. You got another job. So this is why I say that might be something to consider. Some people even work 3 jobs, not full-time jobs, but maybe you work like one job in the mornings, you have another job at night, then you have another job on the weekends, something like that. But something to where, you're still getting the income that you need, but it's the whole like feeling good about yourself, the peace of mind, the stress relief of not having to worry about, I really hate this job, I don't even want to get up in the morning, I'm so sick of this place. Just trying to move past those feelings by finding a job you really do like. So I hope that some of these topics were fun to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about them more. But I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope to see you again soon.